Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The last 8 years from 2015 to 2022 were the hottest on record worldwide. Now this as per the State of the Global Climate 2022 report by the World Meteorological Organization, which makes some worrying revelations about record high temperatures, melting glaciers and rising pollution globally. It says the global mean temperature in 2022 was 1.15 degrees Celsius above the 1850-1900 average. 2022 was also the fifth or the sixth warmest year on record. This was despite 3 consecutive years of a cooling La Niña, such as a triple dip. La Niña has happened only 3 times in the past 50 years. As greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and the climate continues to change, populations worldwide continue to be gravely impacted by extreme weather and climate events. As many as 95 million people have been displaced due to extreme weather events, as per this report. In Perspective today, we take a closer look at the key findings of the WMO report and what accelerated action is now required to mitigate the crisis. Joining me are 2 distinguished guests. Let me introduce them to you. I have with me Dr. Mrityunjay Mahapatra, Director General, India Meteorological Department, Government of India, and Mr. C.K. Mishra, former Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program today on Sansad TV. Dr. Mahapatra, let me begin the program today with you. You know, the WMO report has a raft of bad news about the state of the global climate. What is the most worrying thing in this report for you?
The WMO report for the year 2022 reiterates the fact that climate is changing in an enhanced rate in the recent times, especially since 1970. And it has got large repercussions in terms of our social life, economic life, and also our environment. As the temperature rises, immediately its impact comes in terms of the heat wave. The frequency, duration, and intensity of the heat wave increases. At the same time, the cold wave conditions reduces in the places where the temperature rises. But that does not mean that cold wave does not occur. It can occur because the variability, the year-to-year variation, or the variation within the season itself has become larger in the recent times because of the impact of climate change. Also, we find that as the temperature increases, the moisture content of the atmosphere has increased. With rise in temperature by 1 degree Celsius, the moisture content in the atmosphere increases by 7%. Therefore, the atmosphere has now better holding capacity for the moisture. And hence, when it rains heavily. As a result, in the tropical countries, you will find the frequency of heavy rainfall events has increased. And in India also, being a tropical country, especially over central India and South India, the frequency of heavy rainfall has increased, right, and frequency of light rainfall or moderate rainfall has decreased. It has got repercussions in the sense that when it is raining heavily, there will be soil erosion, there will be less percolations, there will be more runoff, and in the riverine area, it can cause riverine floods. In the hill areas, it can cause landslides, mudslides, or in the urban areas, it can cause the urban floods. In addition to that, there are evidence that the occurrence of these events like heat waves and heavy rainfall can be attributed to the impact of climate change. The thunderstorm is the third phenomena which is getting affected by the climate change. The frequency and intensity of thunderstorm has increased, and specifically the lightning frequency has also increased in many parts of the world. And in India also, you will find that there is increased frequency of lightning, especially over eastern India, where it is popularly called as the Kal Boisakhi or thunderstorm, as it kills people. So apart from all these things, the frequency and intensity of cyclone, if you just look at, number of intense cyclones are globally increasing. In India, the intense cyclones are increasing over the Arabian Sea. But globally, the total number of cyclones are decreasing or remaining same. So while doing all these things as a detection, India Meteorological Department provides an annual statement which goes to IPCC, World Meteorological Organizations, as a regional climate center, and hence it helps in formulating the science of climate change and detections and mitigation aspects. So while we are dealing with the detection in this way by collecting all the data from the ocean and atmosphere, we also go for attribution studies, proving whether the change is attributable to the increase in greenhouse gases or anthropogenic activities. We also have a Center for Climate Change Research in Ministry of Earth Sciences to provide the forecast or the projection based on the expected rise in concentration of the greenhouse gases. It also suggests that this phenomena, which has been occurring in the recent years because of the climate change, will go on increasing as for the projections by 2050 or 2100.
Right. Amid
Only
warnings.
one good thing is that
Yes.
the total amount of rainfall occurring in the country during the monsoon season is not changing drastically. It is almost random and trendless. But the distribution of rainfall has changed from west to east. The area like Saurashtra Kutch or West Rajasthan, which was getting less rainfall, it shows an increasing trend of rainfall. And the areas like northeastern states, Bihar, Jharkhand, eastern UP is showing a decreasing trend in total amount of rainfall in the monsoon season. So therefore, with these changes, there is a need for various adaptive measures and policy formulations at the national level and the international level, which is also being taken
Dr.
up
Mahapatra.
by different
We'll
agencies.
come to what timely action is needed by India, by the world at large, and collective action to say, because it's a collective crisis that humanity today is facing. We'll come to that in just a bit. Let me bring in Mr. Mishra into the discussion. Mr. Mishra, another report just a few days ago, I remember we were talking about the IPCC synthesis report, another report with dire warnings about the intensity, about the impact of extreme weather events induced by climate change. How many more such reports to understand, for humanity to understand that the climate time bomb is ticking?
Well, I would say it's not just the frequency of the reports which are pointing to it, which is alarming. What is alarming is the consistency with which all reports are saying that we are moving from bad to worse. This is a global report. And what is it talking about? It's talking about extreme phenomena like floods, droughts in parts of the globe where it had never happened before. What does it talk about? It says, as you rightly mentioned, the mean temperature being 1.15 till 19 on the basis of 1900. It says that today we are having the maximum greenhouse emission. And this is what should worry us. What is really striking is if the emission levels are still very high and the impact, as Dr. Mahapatra was explaining, is so intense, we need to sit back and think what we've been doing for the last 20 years or so. Year after year, we have global meetings where we coin excellent phrases, where we come up with what we say are great ideas and great move forward. But at the end of the day, the glaciers are melting faster than ever. The sea temperature is rising faster than ever. The earth is facing phenomenal changes, which all means that globally we have a sense of what is happening, but no sense of what the micro level planning is going to be. So I personally feel that we still don't globally have a plan in place to actually tackle climate change. And that is the most worrying part as far as I'm concerned. You know, who's going to make that plan? And who's going to fund it? These are larger issues. But the immediate issue is, do you have an actual countrywide plan of containing and reducing emission? Or are we just going to allow GHG emission to carry on? So unless we come to a conclusion on this, I don't see much happening. This report, like any other report, sets out the alarm bell. I don't know if anybody is listening.
Dr. Mahapatra, that's the huge worry. Report after report sounding the alarm bell. with no concrete action. There are just reports, there are words that we're going to take action, but the action, it's not translating into any kind of worthwhile action by the world at large. If I try and understand from you about the vulnerable countries, because the losses and the damage that these countries, especially the poorer countries, are suffering is tremendous. This report puts the number at 95 million people who've been displaced because of just these extreme weather events. What kind of accelerated action do you think going forward it is required by the world to stop the after effects, especially on these countries that have contributed very little to this great crisis that we are facing?
Yeah. So thank you. I agree with Mr. Saab that we should have an accelerated action plan to deal with or to combat with the ill impacts of the climate change. But however, there has been a quite good beginning in the 1990s with United Nations Framework for Climate Change Conventions, followed by various protocols like Kyoto protocols. Then in 2015, we came up with the Sendai Framework for Sustainable Development Goals in view of the climate change. And recently, also it has been understood by United Nations that if you want to really deal with the climate change, you have to go for the first and foremost thing, that is early warning for all. In 2022, United Nations and World Meteorological Organization came together to give a call, that is early warning for all. It is mainly because, as you told, many poor countries, least developed countries, island nations, they do not have even the early warning system. To forget about the early warning system, they do not have the meteorological observations capacity. Right. They do not have even a certain basic observational network like temperature, pressure, winds, etc. So therefore, in the absence of this observational network, in the absence of the capacity to run the computers or to see the forecasts generated by other countries even, they are lagging in implementing the early warning system. About 55% of the countries do not have the early warning at present. So the objective is to have the early warning by them. For this purpose, you need investment, as Mr. Shah was telling. A lot of investments needed to enable these poor countries to have a system to deal with these extreme events in view of their increasing frequency, intensity, and the impact, and increasing vulnerability of the populations. As you correctly told, the coastal population especially, and therefore it becomes more dangerous for the island nations, where sea level is rising, not only because of the increasing temperature and hence thermal expansion of the seawater, but also because of the melting of the snow cover or melting of the ice sheets from polar regions and the third poles even. And also there is some contribution towards the fresh rainfall. But if you just look at majority of the contribution towards sea level rise comes from the melting of the sea ice and also the thermal expansion of the water. So therefore the first victim will be the coastal population in all the countries and also the island nations. So therefore we have to think about the various adaptation measures and the mitigation measures. And the first one, they have taken a call at early warning. But if you consider India as a whole, India is far ahead compared to many countries. And we have come up with 10-point action plan of the Honorable Prime Minister. And there are now the agencies like the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change formulating adaptation and mitigation measures, and MOES, Minister of Earth Science, giving the science part of the climate change. We've also come up with the state-level climate centers, in addition to National Climate Center of Climate Change, what we have in Minister of Earth Sciences. Almost all states are coming up with the establishment of the climate centers, and also district-level action plans are being prepared. Sustainable development goal, if you just look at that, 17 sustainable development goal identified by the world community. 13 number is the climate actions. So each and every country has to take climate actions. And the climate actions means not only the formulation of policy plans and establishment of organizations, but also the macro level actions, large scale actions to minimize the source of greenhouse gases and to enhance the sinks so that the greenhouse gases will not spoil our sustained environment. So in that regard, there are various actions. So for example, the renewable energy sector or the power sector. At the same time, you have to go for sustainable sources, our living, our clothing, our shelter. Everything should be redesigned and supportive towards the cause of and sustainable development, and hence to fight with the climate change. At the same time, I will suggest there are need for the micro level actions. Each and every human being also is responsible for creating this problem. So therefore, we can work together as a human being to contribute in such a manner that we are not source of the greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, or some other CFCs or nitrous oxide. At the same time, we should go for forestation so that the sink, the area which can absorb the carbon dioxide, is also restored. Deforestation can be minimized. Use of plastic cover can be reduced. Travel by the transport like vehicles, etc., can be minimized. And we can adapt the new transport system.
You're
also.
right. These are steps that we have to take at individual levels, at community levels, at the national level, and most importantly at the global level. Mr. Mishra, when we talk at the global level, there are two terms specific to climate action that are used and on which a lot of work is required: adaptation and resilience. And herein, we are seeing the least action by the developed countries in helping the developing world, who, as Mr. Mahapatra rightly said, do not even have the early warning systems, projections to tell them about these extreme weather events. So what is the kind of help, what is the kind of effort that is required on part of the developed world to help these countries adapt to this crisis that we are facing today?
Let me first and foremost put this very clearly that COP after COP or any meeting so far was concentrating on mitigation alone. Adaptation has now started finding a place. And that is a very critical move now. You know, globally, this move will have to be supported with technology and with finance. Dr. Mahapatra was just mentioning that 55% of the countries don't even have early warning system. We are still talking about capacity building after so many years is the concern that I have. We should actually have been talking about real projects being implemented. India has done well, much better than many other countries. But my fear is that climate change is not restricted to a geography. If countries around you are emitting, if countries around you are not careful, your efforts are going to go in vain. Therefore, I time and again say that local work has to be supported by global oversight and action.
Really?
Unless there is global action, we will not succeed. Adaptation is the key, particularly for India, where you have small and marginal farmers, and resilience building, both in infrastructure as well as human beings. These are two factors which India has taken up, and I think the globe needs to understand that these are two very critical things in climate change scenario. And so far, very little finance has been provided for this activity. I think the world needs to get together to come forward to transfer technology without any hitch, and B, if nothing else, at least provide the promised finance that the climate change needs. If these two things do not happen, I think, when God forbid, if nothing moves, maybe years down the line, we'll be discussing the same thing. So what is critical right now, according to me, and one of the aspects that the report throws up, for example, I mean, everybody around the world, when we talk about GHG emission, we talk about carbon dioxide. The report says that there's been significant and very high jump in methane emission. Now, we all know what methane emission is about, but the world has not got a plan to contain methane emission effectively. So we'll have to work on all this. And if there is a key moving ahead, it is adaptation. People will have to adapt, our infrastructure will have to change, our agriculture patterns will have to change, our lifestyles will have to change. India is, of course, talking about life now. Lifestyles will have to change. Each one's contribution will become critical. But I'll again say that unless global finance and technology is available, all these things will remain a dream.
You're right. These efforts are all going to go in vain if there is, unless there is a global approach to address this problem, because it's something that the entire humanity is facing. Dr. Mahapatra, these, warnings in the times to come, the intensity of these events is only going to increase with time because we've not taken timely action. We treated it as a future problem. The problem is now at our doorstep and we have no solution to deal with it. what are the challenges that the weather agencies, that the agencies that are monitoring these events are going to face in the times to come in projections, correct projections, precise projections, and especially dealing with a country like ours, we happen to be one of the most vulnerable to climate change events?
Thank you. See, climate change not only is impacting the frequency, intensity, and duration of extreme weather events, but also the analysis, research suggests that climate change also limits the predictability of the extreme weather.
Right.
If you can predict, for example, the heavy rainfall event 3 days in advance in the absence of climate change, in the presence of climate change, you can predict only 1.5 days in advance. That means the lead period of the prediction is threatened by the adverse impact of the climate change. But the good thing is that over the period of, say, last 10 years, you will find that the forecast accuracy of India Meteorological Department has increased, not decreased, and there is 40% improvement in forecast accuracy of extreme weather in 2018 to 22 compared to 2013 to 17. So it has been possible because of the intervention. As Mr. Saab was telling, there is need for intervention in terms of science and technology and also the financial investments. So there has been investment and development of the technology and its applications so that the ill aspects of the climate change has been addressed. So the process should continue. In Indian scenario, we have to continue to our journey in terms of improving the observational systems, in terms of the satellites, radars, and automated stations and other observing tools. Also, we have to go for improving our computing power so that you can go for very high resolution numerical weather prediction models and dense observational network processing system. Also, we should have the more specific models to address towards the newly emerging weather systems or threatening systems. We have to go for impact-based forecast system in earnest terms, in the sense that every village or every ward of a town should get not only the weather forecast, but also the risk assessment based on the impact, vulnerability, and the exposure of the area. And hence, we will be providing the information not only what the weather will be tomorrow, but also what the weather will do tomorrow to the various sectors and the humanity. And finally, we have to go for the last mile connectivity. India is such a country that you have the population along the coast, and you have got the seas on the north and the south, the east and west. You have got the Great Himalayas to the north, which are the data sparse region. So they are reaching out the last mile becomes also difficult, and for that also India has come up with satellite-based communication system to reach out. But journey should not stop. Journey should continue with more investment and more invention of the technology with which we can progress our forecast and early warning systems, and also adaptation and mitigation measures. So I just want to say that when you go for this improvement in other countries, there has been a new proposal which has been taken up by World Meteorological Organization and all countries in this world. And India is a member of WMO, and I am the Executive Council member of the WMO. We have agreed to the proposal. Under that proposal, there is scope for public-private engagement. The private parties can come together and donate to all these island nations and small countries, poor countries, so that they can have an observational system and forecasting system. And for that purpose, a scheme has been taken up that is called a systematic observations and forecasting facility for the poor and underdeveloping countries. And there, India has committed to provide the technical support. India will be a peer advisor for the countries in South Asia and adjoining African countries and Arabian countries, where we will provide the technical guidance and support for establishment of this observational network and forecasting system, which will be funded by many public and private agencies.
So that is taking on from what you just said, Dr. Mahapatra, let me take that question to Mr. Mishra. Mr. Mishra, in times of unprecedented crisis, we've seen India has been among the very few countries willing to help others, catering to its own huge population as well. We saw that during the pandemic, the way we distributed vaccines. This is a crisis which calls for collective action. India holds the presidency of G20. We are following the path of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We are saying the world has one future, the world is one family, and we ought to work together to find a solution. So as you rightly said, this particular crisis will require a global approach. Does India have it in itself to take the lead at this time, at this critical juncture, to ensure that we have a coordinated plan of action. The countries come together, not just in terms of dealing with the crisis, but hand-holding the others, the vulnerable, the poor countries who do not have the resources?
I think India very much has it in it, and it should take the lead, both because of its experience of sharing knowledge and technology, and also that every kind of adverse event that you're talking about globally, India is familiar or facing that.
Right.
G20, I think, is the launch pad. If the globe misses this launch pad, I don't know where we're going to catch up. And since India has the leadership, I think it has that much of additional responsibility to make sure that there is a global agreement, not just an agreement which talks in terms of principles and policies, but an agreement of projects and implementation. Second, who does climate change impact most? It is the vulnerable countries. So the vulnerable countries need hand-holding. And hand-holding cannot be done by a single country. So there has to be a global coalition thinking about how do we create a structure, an institutional mechanism by which we continuously handhold these countries. I mean, one-off measure of providing X equipment or providing X knowledge or technology, I don't think that is the best or the optimal solution. That's a good one, but not the best. The best is that you create an institutional mechanism where continuously you monitor and provide that knowledge, technology, and finance to the underprivileged and the vulnerable countries in the world, and do that. And I think to do all this, G20 is an ideal launchpad.
Absolutely. And with initiatives like LIFE, the ambitious target that India has set for itself to cut greenhouse gas emissions, the climate targets that we are rigorously now approaching, the whole idea is, and as Dr. Mahapatra and Mr. Mishra rightly suggested, India has in itself, we have policies and programs that have been undertaken in recent years. But the bottom line is, it is a crisis that the entire humanity today is facing. It's not for any individual country to just walk on the path of progress. It is a collective action. Every country has to work in this together. And the hand-holding by the developed world is essential for those who today are the most vulnerable, the poor and the least developed countries. So this is something in which timely action is required, and that action has to happen now. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. I would like to thank both my guests, Dr. Mahapatra, Mr. Mishra, for joining us on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.